All right. So yes, we are talking about Star Wars. We're talking about canon. We're talking about Protestants. We're talking about tradition. We're talking about Catholics. That is what we're talking about. Why? Because Star Wars reflects in real time. Where's the camera? Right there. That's where the camera is. Okay. Star Wars reflects in real time the way Catholics and Protestants separated. And I think a lot of people miss this. They think, oh, it's some secular thing talking about some fake religion. So some fake religion out in like far, far away in a galaxy, whatever. And like, it's really important to understand that this is actually a really good analogy to Protestants and Catholics. And I'm going to walk you through how. I'm going to give you a summary, and then I'm going to follow it up with some examples that go deeper. So Catholics are kind of like when Lucas had Star Wars. The whole canon was taken into account. So you had the books, you had legends, and then you also had the movies. And you had the books of the movies. And then you would have clarifications done by Lucas whenever something problematic came up. So you'd have contradictions maybe within the book or a few books or the movie, and Lucas would come out and clarify and be like, okay, this is how to understand what's being said or being done. Yada, yada, yada. Like, that's how that would be done. And then there was a diversity of tradition in how, and I don't mean like how one understands it, but how one expresses it. So you could go to the movies and just the movies. You could read the books or just the books. You could go to the movies and the books. You can go to convocations where people are, sorry, I'm like looking at myself and looking at the camera. Convocations, and you could do all of those different variations of expression. And you know that Lucas is still the creator of Star Wars. And what he says is ultimately what the canon is, or what the tradition is. Let's go to Protestants. So Protestants are like Disney. You have Star Wars. The canon is heavily censored. Like, a lot of legends was taken out. The movies were taken out. There was even like talk about whether or not Clone Wars, the cartoon adaptation, 3D adaptation, would stay in. That was ultimately, that ultimately stayed, but that was talked about. And it was for the interest of keeping, or so like that was done explicitly for the interest of Disney to shape the narrative around Star Wars in a way that they wanted. And specifically how they understood it. So it wasn't just, well, we have this super duper terrible narrative. It's no, they had a certain understanding of what the product was, of what the IP was, and they wanted to shape it in their image or in their understanding to a fuller extent. And while doing that, they applied a lot of secular fads. Now we have like the rainbow flag is a very clear one with how that is being represented. The force is female, feminism being promoted to a ridiculous degree. A variety of problems are being promoted within this IP that did not happen before. And so you have this disagreement among the fan base. It's not like how everyone was like, yeah, like what Lucas is doing like is great, and that didn't even happen. It was Lucas was the guiding rod for understanding what was canon and what wasn't. Whereas like with Disney, people are like, well, I don't take anything Disney does as anything more than fan fiction. And so basically it's the 6 movies and Clone Wars. That is canon. Or it's the 6 movies, Clone Wars, and Legends books. Because the way they depicted Luke made more sense compared to how he's being depicted in the sequel trilogy. And then, like, So you have these radically different narratives in the populace, in the fan base, that didn't exist anywhere close to the level that it did when Lucas was in charge. And Lucas was like the clarifier. And so Disney is doing with the IP, or what Disney is doing with the IP, is radically different from the understandings that Lucas did. And it breaks in, it creates a broken hermeneutic, which is to say, it breaks the story and what's being taught through the story. Because stories are there for us to learn. It's not simply for entertainment, although in a lot of cases, you know, there are stories that are just for entertainment. Take like pretty much any action movie that just has a lot of guns and killing involved. Those are typically just for fun, like Rambo. Like, it's entertaining to watch. Now, that doesn't necessarily, I mean, I say that I haven't actually watched Rambo. So like, okay, anyways, like, there are action movies that are out there for entertainment. I get it. But Star Wars, there's definitely things being said. There's a good and evil narrative, like, that's fairly obvious, and it's represented with red being evil and blue, purple, green. You know, pick a lightsaber that isn't red, and they're at odds with each other, or at least that used to be the case, right? Like, now there's like gray Jedis that don't even like make sense in the continuum of what was previously done in Star Wars. Compared to now. And that's a little bit more nuanced. That's a little bit more like in the weeds. So I'm trying to like keep it at this like 5,000 foot level. So then tradition no longer becomes, under Disney, tradition no longer becomes an expression, but an understanding. Like, the tradition is these six movies, these are canon. The sequel trilogy is not canon. In fact, like, I do that. Like, with my family, like, it's like my kids are not watching the sequel trilogy. Why? Because they take, you know, great heroes that grew in the original series, and then they made them a terrible father, a girl boss, a depressed, lonely hermit man that was hopeless, that did actions that went against the very like principle of the character existing in the first place. Like, there's a lot of problems with how the old guard was presented in the new movies, and I don't want my kids, at least now, you know, they'll grow up and they'll watch it, but like, at least now, I don't want them looking at Luke as being someone who's filled with hope just to have it killed and take it away from him. And then he kind of finds it somewhere doing something that isn't very clear, and then he kills himself. Like, that doesn't seem great. Like, that doesn't seem like a good thing. But getting back to what we're talking about, like, so like, the analogies, no analogy is perfect. Like, analogies are there to show concepts. And so in this case, like, Lucas himself is kind of like the papacy. Now, obviously, he's also the creator, and so he kind of plays a double role where he's like, you know, kind of like Jesus, if we're really going to like go that level, but that's not my intention. I'm not saying Lucas is Jesus, but what I am saying is Lucas is like, when he was in charge of it, he was the clarifying opinion that everyone agreed with. And if you didn't agree with him, it's like, there was the serious question of like, why do you even care about Star Wars? Like, why do you even like you can watch it as entertainment, but like, your opinion like just doesn't matter at that point. Whereas like now, like, you have anywhere from like geeks and gamers to critical drinker to, I mean, like, I can just start naming a whole bunch of people who are just critical, and they have their own view of Star Wars and what they loved about Star Wars. And it shows this disunity within Star Wars. Like, basically, in a very similar way, like, me, them, and a whole bunch of other people are in agreement that the way that things are done wrong. And so there's a Protestant aspect to that, because what holds Protestants together in terms of like unifying? Like, I know that the argument will be like, you know, we have this invisible church, and this invisible church is what brings us together. It becomes a problem when you start talking about any sacraments, even baptism. There's a profession of faith in some manner that's done, and that's like the lowest bar of unity in terms of what's a Christian, what's not. And then, but then there's this, like, there's a bunch of Protestants, and so I can't like account for all of them. But what does unify them is their disagreement with the Catholic Church. When you start talking about things that are very Catholic and, or, you know, organized in a Catholic type structure, even the Orthodox, like it's a lot of Protestants are very uncomfortable with the Orthodox because so much of it sounds Catholic. And so when it comes to Geeks and Gamers, Critical Drinker, myself, and how we understand the canon of Star Wars, we're basically making it up based off our own understanding. Now, I'm not saying we're making it up out of nothing. Like, we all have our justifications. We all have our reasoning. But there's a very different understanding. Like, when Disney says this is canon, it's like, well, maybe. I can disagree with it. And so, like, there's a Protestant angle there where when the Pope comes and says the Marian dogmas are something you have to believe, a lot of Protestants just don't believe that. They're like, okay, well, maybe. Or no, that's not in the Bible. Or, you know, pick a whatever standard. Like, there's some Protestant thing that it's a maybe at best, and it's an absolute rejection at worst. And so when it comes to Catholicism, like how we understand and what's happening, like, we do have diversity of tradition. Like, we have 23 Eastern rites, and so we do have these like convocations, like where they're like all over the place, but there's a unity, there's a measurement there's a tangible measurement of unity, that is the sacraments and being under the Pope. And so there's some other things too, but it's obviously the profession of faith of the Nicene Creed and so forth. But like, again, I'm trying to keep this at like not too in the weeds, but there is this understanding of, you know, Catholicism is like under Lucas, Protestantism is like under Disney. That's not to say that there isn't a flip either. You will have some people who have like absolute loyalty to what Disney's doing. They're like, oh, well, they bought the IP, so, you know, whatever they do, you know, it doesn't matter that the executive branch of Disney said that they wanted to go after my kids for things that really shouldn't be promoted to kids. It doesn't matter that they wanted to, you know, basically, like, there's this blind loyalty to Disney. That is not the same as having a reasonable loyalty to Disney. But there are also those that are reasonably loyal to Disney. And so there's like this spectrum of disagreement and agreement under Disney, but it's, again, very similar to Protestantism, whereas like under Lucas, if you disagreed with what Lucas said, other Star Wars fans didn't really take you seriously because you went against what was canon. You went against what was established. Like, and that would, you know, that leads into other things, right? Like, that leads into like the Bible itself, where, okay, well, the Catholic Church established the Bible. That's a historical fact. That's not disputable. That is something that actually happened. And if you have a problem understanding that, I will more than happily, there we go, show you resources that explain like how this happened, and not just like one or two sites that are just Catholic only. Like, there are objective sites, you know, I guess objective, because like at the end of the day, like, we're talking about the way the world and universe is and how it's established and how it was inspired by God. And so like there really isn't an objective party outside of God, but reasonable evidence, I should say, of that fact being true, that the first Bible was the Vulgate, as transcribed by St. Jerome, with 73 books. And so when you're Martin Luther and you ask people who are not the church how many books are in the Old Testament, and they give you a different number than what the church states, not knowing like there was a flip or a switch in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century within that very tradition that you're asking, that rejected books because it sounded too Christian-like. That's very similar to being under Disney. And so to kind of clarify that, because I know that's like my kids watching Disney and being like, oh, Star Wars was always like this. It's like, no, it wasn't. There was actually like consistency between like how things are now and or I'm sorry, between the legends and the books, the books and the movies, and then like compared to what's happening now, where just a bunch of fads are getting in and a bunch of secular culture is being put in. Now, mind you, it's always been there, but it's like there's a difference between like, I'll bring up the gray Jedi, which I talked about earlier. A gray Jedi is someone who uses both light and dark sides of the Force. In the expanded universe or legends, this was explored, and it was basically stated and shown to be terrible, that anybody who did both went mad, like they went crazy. Now you can say like, all right, the Sith are crazy. That's true, but they're like reasonable, like in the sense that they can actually be reasoned with. Like those that went mad, like went mad, and it became like a real problem because internally, what were they doing? They were having the light and the dark fight within their very being. And that's a problem within the universe of that's established. And you know what? Like I haven't even like read, like I just want to clarify, I haven't even read these legend books, but like that like is pretty easy to find. But it's a pretty good example of there's showcasing of things that shouldn't exist that do now exist, that do now exist. Just like how in Protestantism, the sin of Onan was rejected at the turn of the 1900s. Well, I don't want to say the turn, but 1930 by the Anglicans. And then everybody else that was Protestant basically adopted that. Like that contraception was okay and all this other things. But like, excuse me, that goes with what we're talking about. Like, and it's like really interesting to like dive into. And I would love to have a discussion specifically with my friend Catholic Comedy, because he wants to have a discussion on this. And I'd like to just not talk to a camera, but talk to someone else, because I do think it's very important to not just be having, like an echo chamber for myself. Like, I don't want to straw man people. I don't want to give a presentation that is not charitable. Again, it's very hard to talk about all Protestants because they vary like horrendously from each other. Like, and I say horrendously in the worst possible way, because there are Protestants that are looked at as Christian that are not. Like as Catholics, we don't, because they don't have baptism the way it's biblically written. Like, and which is probably crazy to hear, but like to some Protestants that haven't like thought about this from a Catholic perspective or don't know, but it is a very wrong thing to not have water baptism in some capacity, and the Trinitarian formula not being applied appropriately or understood appropriately, like with the case with Mormons. Like, we don't consider them Protestants or Christian at all, because of how they understand the Trinity. But the the thing with this is I don't like just saying all of this in like this huge essay, because like I'm not an expert. I'm just simply looking at something, and me as a layperson pointing it out, like I'm seeing this, like I see this correlation with what happened in history between Catholics and Protestants, and I'm simply pointing it out. Like I'm a statistician, correlations are kind of like one of those things I pay attention to. And socially, when you see such correlations, there's typically similar type of causation. Not to say that the separation is based on biblical standards in the Star Wars thing. I'm saying that there's a disagreement that is similar in kind, but not in magnitude. Yes, I do want to get back to like having a discussion with Catholic Comedy or anybody else who would like to talk about this, because I do think it's very interesting when you see when you're able to point out similarities like this, when you're able to approach a topic and critically think about it in such a way that you can then reflect on another topic with it, because I think that really does show one's ability to understand. And even if they don't understand perfectly, that there is a concept there that is being applied. And I think the same thing is happening here. So if you're willing to, I'd be willing to have some sort of discussion with those that are in good faith willing to have that discussion. So Catholic Comedy gets first dibs though, because he already called it. So I hope this has been insightful, and I hope my editing doesn't suck too much, because I did say a few things that were a bit much, and I really do, like I said, want to be charitable to Protestants, being that I'm a Catholic, because I don't want to straw man them. I'm just noticing an analogy, or I'm pointing out an analogy that is similar to how we understand things from different perspectives, and that we're trying to, in a very real way, come back to unity. And obviously from our perspective, that is to come back to Catholicism. And that is a hard pill to swallow for some people, and I get that. But it is I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't mean it. So I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't think it was possible, at least for some people. So I am really bad at like ending videos. I just kind of keep going, and like I think of other things to say and I go off on tangents. So I think I'm just going to end it here, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my rambling. Gosh, no, when I say that, I think of Pilgrim Pass, because he says that, and he like, it's such a good way to end. And I like in admiration to him and how he ends in his humble way of expressing very insightful thoughts, I want to say it. And so it just comes off like I don't even think about it, but like the second I said it, I thought about it, and now I'm on this other tangent. So yeah, so I'm just whatever. Thank you for watching. Like, leave a comment below if you want more comparisons like this, because I enjoy talking about them. I enjoy, like, it's all connected. How people view things fundamentally, it's all connected. And so I'd love to have conversations that explore that. So have a great day. Have a great night. I'm done. Bye.